Ethan Miller hadn't set out to be anyone's hero that night. He was just a teenager, heading home from his part-time job, tired and cold. His old jacket, faded at the cuffs and barely thick enough for the winter chill, was the only thing keeping the biting wind at bay. But none of that mattered when he saw the man. Slumped against a crumbling wall near the corner of Maple Street, the man looked like a shadow, blending into the dark with his thin, tattered clothes, his arms wrapped around his knees as if trying to hold himself together against the icy wind. Ethan slowed, his breath clouding in the frigid air. He could have kept walking. What could he possibly do for someone like that? But then the man looked up, and their eyes met. In that moment, Ethan saw something he couldn't ignore, a quiet desperation, a silent plea. "Do you have anything warm?" the man asked, his voice rasping. Ethan hesitated, gripping the edges of his jacket. It wasn't much, but it was his only shield against the cold. Giving it away didn't make sense. But something inside him, a voice he couldn't ignore, urged him forward. Without thinking, Ethan shrugged off the jacket and knelt down. "Here," he said, draping it over the man's trembling shoulders. The man's hands, frail and weathered, clutched the jacket tightly. His eyes filled with tears as he looked up at Ethan. You don't even know me," the man whispered, his voice breaking. "You don't have to know someone to help," Ethan said softly, standing up. As he walked away, the cold cut through his thin sweater, but Ethan felt something new, a warmth in his chest that made the cold a little more bearable. What he didn't know was that his small act of kindness was about to change everything. What happens next will inspire an entire town and change Ethan's life forever. Stay tuned to see how one jacket can spark a miracle. If you're moved by this story, comment 2 feet below. If you think it could be better, comment 7. And don't forget to subscribe to Elderly Wisdom for more inspiring tales that warm the heart. The next morning, Ethan Miller woke up to the sound of a knock at the door. It was loud, urgent, echoing through their small apartment. Rubbing his eyes, Ethan shuffled out of bed, still groggy from the restless night. His mom peeked out from the kitchen, her eyebrows furrowed in curiosity. "Who could that be this early?" she asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I'll get it," Ethan mumbled, yawning as he headed for the door. When he opened it, he froze. Standing in the hallway was a tall man in a sharp black coat, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. Behind him, a sleek black car idled at the curb, its engine humming softly. "Ethan Miller?" the man asked, his voice calm and professional. Yeah, that's me," Ethan replied, suddenly wide awake. The man's lips curved into a warm smile. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Aldridge, the gentleman you helped last night." Ethan's stomach flipped. "The old man?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "Is he okay?" "More than okay," the man assured him. "He asked me to deliver this." The man stepped aside, and another individual appeared, carrying a large box wrapped in dark blue paper with a silver ribbon. Ethan blinked in confusion as the box was placed carefully into his hands. "What is this?" he asked, glancing between the man and his mom, who had now joined him at the door. "It's a token of appreciation," the man said, tipping his hat politely. "Mr. Aldridge would like to thank you personally, but for now he hopes this will suffice." Before Ethan could say another word, the man turned and strode back to the car. Moments later, the vehicle disappeared down the street, leaving Ethan and his mom standing in stunned silence, curious about what's inside the box. The surprise waiting for Ethan will leave you speechless. In the kitchen, Ethan placed the box on the table, his hands shaking slightly as he untied the ribbon and carefully opened it. His mom leaned over his shoulder, her face a mix of worry and intrigue. Inside was a jacket, but not just any jacket. This one was brand new, thick and luxurious, the kind of jacket Ethan could only dream of owning. Beneath the jacket was an envelope. Ethan picked it up, his heart pounding, and opened it to find a handwritten letter and something that made him gasp, a check. The check had more zeros than Ethan had ever seen in his life. His mom's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. "Ethan, what is this?" she stammered. He unfolded the letter, his hands trembling as he read aloud. "Dear Ethan, your kindness saved me last night, not just from the cold, but from losing hope. I wasn't always in the position you saw me in yesterday. Once I had everything, but I lost it all. Your selflessness reminded me of what truly matters. Please accept this gift for you and your family as a token of my gratitude. With heartfelt thanks, James Aldridge. Ethan's throat tightened as he looked at the check again. It was made out to his mom, the amount more than enough to pay off their rent for months. His mom sat down heavily in a chair, tears streaming down her face. Ethan, this is a miracle. Ethan couldn't speak. He thought about the man's frail frame, the way he had clutched the old jacket as though it were life itself. He hadn't done it for a reward. He had just done what he thought was right. But this wasn't the end of Ethan's journey. The next surprise would change not just his life, but his entire town. 2 days later, Ethan Miller was on his way home from school when he noticed something unusual. Parked in front of his apartment building was the same sleek black car from before. His pulse quickened. What now? As he approached, the driver stepped out and opened the door. Ethan hesitated, his backpack slung over one shoulder, before a familiar face emerged. James Aldridge. But this wasn't the frail, trembling man Ethan had met that icy night. This James Aldridge was transformed. Clean-shaven and wearing a tailored coat, he looked vibrant, almost unrecognizable. "Ethan," James said, his voice warm as he stepped forward. "It's good to see you again." Ethan blinked, still trying to process the transformation. "Mr. Aldridge, you look different," James chuckled. "All thanks to you. That jacket wasn't just warmth for my body, it was hope for my soul." Ethan opened his mouth to reply, but James held up a hand, gesturing toward the car. "Come with me. There's something I want you to see." Inside the car, James explained as they drove through town. "I wasn't always on the streets," he began. "Years ago, I ran a successful company. But bad decisions, betrayal, and frankly, my own pride cost me everything. I hit rock bottom. That night, I was ready to give up. But you—" He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "You reminded me that kindness still exists, that there's always a way back." Ethan listened in stunned silence, unsure how to respond. The car pulled into a narrow street and stopped in front of a large building with a sign that read, Ashwood Community Center. James smiled as he opened the door. "Come on," he said, gesturing for Ethan to follow. What Ethan found inside would prove that one small act of kindness could ripple into something extraordinary. The moment Ethan stepped through the doors, he was greeted by warmth, not just from the heaters humming in the corners, but from the energy in the room. Children laughed as they painted colorful murals on the walls. Volunteers bustled around with trays of food, and families gathered in cozy corners sharing meals and stories. "This was once an abandoned building," James explained, his eyes scanning the room. "But after our encounter, I knew I had to do something meaningful. With the resources I had left, and a few old friends willing to believe in a second chance, I reopened this place as a haven for anyone in need." Ethan looked around, his heart swelling. The transformation was incredible. "But why show me this?" Ethan asked, his voice quiet. James turned to him, his expression serious. "Because this wouldn't exist without you. Your act of kindness set everything in motion, and I wanted you to see the difference you've made." Ethan's eyes burned with unshed tears. "I didn't do anything special," he said, shaking his head. James placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You gave me hope when I had none. That's the most special thing anyone can do." James led Ethan to a stage at the front of the room. A microphone stood waiting, and a small crowd began to gather. Ethan's heart raced as James addressed the audience. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Ethan Miller," James began, his voice echoing through the room. "This young man didn't just give me his jacket on a cold night. He gave me a reason to keep going. His kindness inspired the reopening of this center, and today I'm proud to dedicate it in his honor." Ethan's jaw dropped as James stepped aside to reveal a plaque mounted on the wall. It read, "The Ethan Miller Hope Center, where kindness changes lives." The room erupted in applause. Ethan's mom, who had quietly entered moments before, stood near the front, tears streaming down her face. Overwhelmed, Ethan stepped up to the microphone. He glanced at James, then at the crowd, searching for the right words. "I never thought something so small could lead to all of this," he began, his voice trembling. "I just did what I thought was right. But seeing all of you here, it shows me that kindness isn't small at all. It's the biggest thing we can give." The applause grew louder, and Ethan felt a warmth inside him that no winter chill could ever touch. Ethan stood near the edge of the stage, the applause from the crowd still echoing in his ears. His mom came up and hugged him tightly, her voice trembling. "I'm so proud of you, Ethan," she whispered. But the moment wasn't just about pride, it was about connection. Ethan looked out at the faces in the crowd, families, children, volunteers, and even strangers who had gathered to celebrate what this center represented. It wasn't just about a name on a plaque or a single act of kindness. It was about the community coming together to create something bigger. After the ceremony, Ethan and James walked through the center together. James explained the programs they were launching: after-school tutoring for kids, meal distributions for struggling families, and job training for adults trying to get back on their feet. "I want you to be a part of this," James said, stopping in front of a colorful mural a group of kids had painted. "You've got a gift, Ethan. People look up to you. You can make a real difference here." Ethan hesitated, unsure if he was ready for such responsibility. "I'm just a kid," he said softly. James smiled. "And yet you've done what most adults wouldn't, taken action when it mattered most. You don't have to have all the answers. You just need to keep leading with your heart." In the weeks that followed, Ethan found himself returning to the center almost every day after school. He helped tutor younger kids, organize donation drives, and even worked with James on new ideas to expand the center's reach. One day, as Ethan was helping distribute warm meals to families, a young boy approached him. The boy, no older than 10, wore a jacket that was clearly too big for him. His shy eyes darted up at Ethan, and then to the name on the plaque hanging nearby. "You're Ethan, right?" the boy asked hesitantly. Ethan crouched down to his level, smiling. "Yeah, that's me. What's your name?" "Marcus," the boy replied. He glanced at the line of people waiting for food, then back at Ethan. "My mom says you gave someone your jacket, and it saved his life." Ethan chuckled softly, feeling a little embarrassed. "Well, it was just a jacket," he said. Marcus shook his head. "It wasn't just a jacket. It was kindness. And my mom says kindness is the most important thing we can give." For a moment, Ethan was speechless. He reached out and patted Marcus's shoulder. "Your mom's right. And you know what? You can be kind too. It doesn't take much to make someone's day better." Marcus grinned and nodded, running off to join his mom. The impact of the Ethan Miller Hope Center spread far beyond Ashwood. Local news outlets picked up the story, and soon donations started pouring in from neighboring towns. People who had once felt invisible found a place where they were seen and valued. One evening, Ethan sat with James in the corner of the center, watching as kids played board games and families shared stories over cups of hot cocoa. "You know," James said, breaking the comfortable silence, "when I was at my lowest, I thought my story was over, but you showed me it wasn't. And now, look at this." He gestured around the room. Ethan nodded, a small smile on his face. "It's amazing how one moment can change so much." James looked at him, his eyes twinkling. "Moments matter, Ethan. And you've created more than just a moment. You've created a movement." Ethan leaned back in his chair, letting the warmth of the room wash over him. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready for whatever came next. Because now he understood, kindness doesn't just change lives, it creates new beginnings. This concludes Ethan's journey, for now. But as the community grew stronger and the Hope Center flourished, it was clear that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. Months had passed since the Ethan Miller Hope Center opened its doors, and the little building on Maple Street had become a beacon of light for the entire town. But for Ethan, the journey was far from over. One crisp spring afternoon, Ethan was walking home from the center, his backpack slung over one shoulder. The streets of Ashwood were busier than usual, filled with the sounds of children playing and neighbors chatting. The town seemed different now, brighter, warmer, as if the hope born in the center had spread far and wide. As Ethan turned onto his street, he saw a familiar car parked outside his apartment building. James Aldridge was leaning casually against the hood, a warm smile spreading across his face as Ethan approached. "James," Ethan called, grinning. "What brings you here?" James gestured toward the car. "Thought it was time we talked about what's next." Ethan raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" James pushed himself off the car and walked over, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "The Hope Center is thriving thanks to you. But I've been thinking, what if we could take what we've built and bring it to more people?" "More people?" Ethan asked, his heart racing slightly. James nodded. "There are the towns, other communities, just like ours. Places where people feel forgotten, where kids don't have a safe place to go, and families don't know where their next meal will come from. What if we could help them too?" Ethan blinked, the enormity of the idea sinking in. "You're talking about expanding?" "Exactly," James said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "We start small, maybe 1 or 2 centers in nearby towns. And who better to help lead this effort than you?" Ethan's world was about to get much bigger, and with it, new challenges and opportunities he never expected. The idea both thrilled and terrified Ethan. He was just a teenager, still balancing school, family, and his work at the center. But as he looked into James's hopeful gaze, he felt a spark of determination. "I don't know if I'm ready for something that big," Ethan admitted. James chuckled. "You didn't think you were ready to lead the Hope Center either, but look what you've done. You're more capable than you realize, Ethan, and you wouldn't be doing it alone. We'd build a team just like we did here." Ethan thought of the people who had come to the center, Marcus and his mom, the kids who found joy in their art classes, the adults who found work through job training programs. They were proof that one small spark could ignite a fire of change. "Okay," Ethan said finally, his voice steady. "I'm in. What do we do first?" The following weeks were a whirlwind. Ethan found himself juggling school and center duties while traveling with James to neighboring towns. They met with community leaders, discussed funding opportunities, and shared the story of how the Hope Center came to be. In one town, they visited an abandoned school building that James envisioned transforming into their next center. It was run down and forgotten, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. But Ethan could see the potential. "This place could be incredible," Ethan said, running his hand along the dusty walls. "It just needs some love." James smiled. "That's exactly what we're going to give it." But not everyone shared their vision. And soon, Ethan and James would face challenges that tested their resolve. As word of their plans spread, some people questioned their motives. Skeptics accused them of trying to gain attention or profit from their work. Others doubted whether a teenager like Ethan had any business leading such a large initiative. One night, after a particularly tough meeting, Ethan slumped into a chair at the Hope Center, his head in his hands. "I don't know if I can do this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. James sat down across from him, his expression calm. "Do you remember what I told you when we first met?" Ethan looked up, confused. "That kindness can change everything?" James nodded. "Exactly. And it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. We know why we're doing this, because it's the right thing to do. People will always find reasons to doubt, but we can't let that stop us." Ethan took a deep breath, the weight in his chest easing slightly. "You're right. I'm not giving up." By summer, the second Hope Center was ready to open its doors. On the day of the grand opening, Ethan stood beside James, looking out at the crowd that had gathered. Among them were families, children, and volunteers, all eager to be part of the change. When Ethan stepped up to speak, his voice was steady and confident. "A year ago, I never imagined I'd be standing here. But one small decision to help someone when they needed it started a journey I'll never forget. This center isn't just about helping people. It's about showing them that no matter how hard things get, they're not alone. And together, we can build something amazing." The crowd erupted in applause, and Ethan felt a sense of pride he couldn't put into words. As the sun set that evening, Ethan stood outside the new center, watching as kids ran and laughed in the yard. James joined him, a satisfied smile on his face. "This is just the beginning, you know," James said. Ethan nodded, a determined glint in his eyes. "I wouldn't have it any other way." And as they stood there, the sound of hope and laughter filling the air, Ethan knew that his journey, one that had started with a single jacket, was far from over. it was only just beginning. The Ethan Miller Hope Center had become a symbol of transformation, not just for Ashwood but for the neighboring towns as well. The second center was thriving, and Ethan, now more confident in his role, began to see the true scope of what kindness could accomplish. But with growth came challenges Ethan hadn't anticipated. One late autumn evening, Ethan and James were reviewing plans for a third Hope Center in a town several miles away. The center had great potential. It was located in an old factory that could be converted into classrooms, community spaces, and a kitchen. But the funding had hit a snag. "This is going to take more resources than we planned," James admitted, rubbing his temples as he scanned the budget spreadsheet. "We might have to put this on hold." Ethan frowned. "But the community there needs it. We've seen it firsthand. Families living out of their cars, kids with no place to go after school. We can't let them down." James sighed, his expression heavy. "I know, Ethan, but without the money it's impossible. Unless—" He hesitated. "Unless what?" Ethan pressed. James looked up, a flicker of an idea in his eyes. "Unless we find a way to rally more people. The community needs to take ownership of this center. If they can see what's possible, they might help us bridge the gap." Ethan leaned back in his chair, considering the challenge. "So we need to inspire them," he said slowly. James smiled faintly. "Exactly, and I think you're the one to do it." But inspiring an entire town wasn't going to be easy, and Ethan was about to face one of his toughest tests yet. Ethan and James organized a town hall meeting, inviting residents, local business owners, and volunteers to hear about their vision for the new Hope Center. As Ethan stood at the front of the packed room, his palms sweaty, he wondered if anyone would care enough to help. He took a deep breath, gripping the edges of the podium. "I know what you're thinking," Ethan began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Why should I care? Why should I give my time or money to something that might not even work?" A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Ethan leaned forward, his tone growing earnest. "When I started this journey, I didn't think I could make a difference either. I thought I was just a kid with no money, no resources. But one night, I decided to do something small. I gave away my jacket. It wasn't much, but it meant the world to someone who needed it. And that small act turned into this." He gestured toward a slideshow projected on the wall, showing images of the thriving centers and the lives they had touched. "This isn't about me," Ethan continued. "It's about all of us. Every small action we take, every little thing we give, adds up. And together, we can create a place where kids feel safe, where families find hope, and where no one has to face their struggles alone." The room was silent for a moment, and Ethan's heart pounded in the pause. Then, slowly, someone in the back began to clap. The applause spread until the entire room was filled with cheers. What happened next proved that a shared vision could unite even the most skeptical hearts. Within weeks, the town rallied behind the project. Local businesses donated materials, volunteers offered their time and skills, and families pitched in with whatever they could spare. Ethan worked alongside them, painting walls, hauling furniture, and even helping to build shelves for the classrooms. One day, as Ethan was sanding down an old table for the center, a woman approached him. She held the hand of a little girl who clutched a small stuffed bear. "Are you Ethan?" the woman asked, her voice soft. Ethan nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead. "That's me. How can I help you?" The woman's eyes glistened with emotion. "You already have. My daughter and I. We were homeless for a while. But when we heard about what you're building here, it gave us hope. We're moving into a shelter nearby, and she's so excited to come to the new center." Ethan knelt down to the little girl's level. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Emma," she said shyly, holding up her bear. "This is Teddy. He says thank you for helping us." Ethan's throat tightened as he smiled at her. "You're very welcome, Emma. I can't wait to see you at the center." Moments like these reminded Ethan why he had started this journey, but the biggest challenge was still ahead. As the opening day of the third center approached, a sudden storm damaged part of the building's roof. The repairs threatened to delay the launch, and morale among the volunteers began to falter. Ethan felt the weight of the setback pressing down on him. Late one evening, he stood in the empty building, staring at the damaged ceiling. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see James. "Feeling overwhelmed?" James asked. Ethan nodded. We've come so far, but it feels like every time we're close, something knocks us back. James smiled. That's how you know it's worth it. The things that matter most are always the hardest to achieve. But think about all the people who believe in this, who believe in you. They're counting on us. Ethan took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. Then let's fix this roof and open these doors, no matter what. With renewed determination, Ethan rallied the volunteers once again. The repairs were completed just in time, and on a sunny spring morning, the Third Hope Center officially opened its doors. As Ethan stood in the courtyard, watching children run and play while families explored the new space, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. James joined him, his smile wide. You did it, James said simply. No, Ethan replied, shaking his head. We did it. And as the sounds of laughter and joy filled the air, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning of an even greater story, one built on kindness, hope, and the belief that together, anything was possible. The Ethan Miller Hope Center was no longer just a place. It had become a movement. With 3 centers thriving across neighboring towns, Ethan's story was inspiring people far beyond Ashwood. But the more they accomplished, the more Ethan felt the weight of what lay ahead. One warm summer afternoon, Ethan sat in the office of the newest Hope Center, poring over papers and budgets. His mom stopped by, bringing him a sandwich and a gentle nudge to take a break. You've been working non-stop, she said, setting the plate down in front of him. You're allowed to breathe, you know. Ethan smiled faintly but didn't look up from the papers. There's so much to do, Mom. We're helping people. But it feels like there's always more. Another roof to fix, another family to feed. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft. You've already done more than most people could dream of. But you can't pour from an empty cup, Ethan. Take care of yourself too. Ethan nodded, her words sinking in. He promised her he'd take the evening off, though his mind remained restless with all the work still ahead. But just as Ethan began to feel the strain of his journey, something unexpected reminded him why he started it all. That evening, Ethan was locking up the center when he noticed a boy sitting on the front steps. The boy looked about 12, his clothes dusty and his backpack frayed. He was staring at the ground, his face tight with worry. Hey there, Ethan said gently, walking over. You okay? The boy looked up, startled, and nodded quickly. Yeah, I'm fine. Ethan sat down beside him, giving him space. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, but if you're here, maybe I can help. The boy hesitated, then shrugged. I heard this place helps people. My mom lost her job, and things have been hard. I was just thinking if I should come in or not. Ethan's chest tightened. He saw himself in the boy, someone trying to hold things together, even when they felt impossible. You came to the right place, Ethan said, his voice steady. We're here to help. You and your mom are welcome any time. The boy's lips twitched into a small smile. Really? Really, Ethan said. Come back tomorrow, and I'll show you around myself. The boy nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. As he stood to leave, he turned back and said, Thanks for not making me feel like a burden. Ethan watched him disappear into the night, the boy's words echoing in his mind. In that moment, Ethan realized that no matter how big the challenges felt, the impact of kindness was always worth it. Over the next few months, Ethan worked to strike a balance between leading the centers and taking time for himself. With James's guidance and a growing team of volunteers, he learned to delegate responsibilities, allowing the movement to grow without relying entirely on him. One day, as Ethan reviewed the plans for a 4th center, James approached him with a mischievous grin. What's that look for? Ethan asked suspiciously. I've got news, James said, pulling out a folded letter. You've been nominated for the National Youth Leadership Award. Ethan blinked, stunned. What? Who nominated me? James shrugged innocently. Let's just say a lot of people think you deserve it. Ethan shook his head, overwhelmed. I don't do this for awards, James. You know that. James placed a hand on his shoulder. I know. But sometimes, recognition can inspire others to follow your lead. This isn't just about you. It's about what you represent. But even as Ethan prepared to accept recognition, Life had one more twist in store. A week before the award ceremony, Ethan received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but as he opened it, his breath caught. It was from Marcus, the young boy he'd met months ago at the first center. Dear Ethan, I wanted to say thank you. My mom and I are doing better now. She found a job, and I made some friends at the center. It's the first time in a long time that I've felt happy. My mom says you're a hero, but I think you're more than that. You're proof that people care. Thank you for not giving up on us. Ethan's hands trembled as he finished reading. Tears pricked his eyes, but they were tears of gratitude. He folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his desk drawer. That single note reminded him of why he'd started this journey, why he couldn't stop, no matter how tired he felt. As Ethan stood on the stage at the award ceremony, the bright lights casting shadows on the sea of faces before him, he felt a wave of nervous energy. I never thought I'd be here, he began, gripping the microphone. When this all started, I was just a kid trying to do what felt right. I didn't know if it would matter, but I've learned something since then. Kindness isn't about changing the world all at once. It's about changing one life at a time. And when we do that, the ripple effects can go farther than we ever imagined. The audience rose in applause, their cheers echoing through the auditorium. But as Ethan looked out, he didn't see strangers. He saw a movement, one built on hope, love, and the belief that even the smallest actions could create something extraordinary. Ethan smiled, his heart full. The journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Ethan Miller's story is more than just about a boy who gave away his jacket on a cold night. It's about the power of kindness to transform lives, build communities, and inspire a movement. From a single act of selflessness, Ethan discovered not only the strength within himself, but also the power of hope to connect people and create change. As the applause faded from the award ceremony, Ethan looked out at the audience, filled with familiar and new faces. In that moment, he realized that his journey was never just about him. It was about everyone who dared to believe that kindness, no matter how small, could ripple outward and change the world. The Ethan Miller Hope Centers became symbols of what could happen when people came together with open hearts. Families found shelter, children found mentors, and entire towns found hope. But perhaps the most important lesson Ethan learned was that the journey of kindness never truly ends. It continues with every hand reached out to lift another, every word of encouragement spoken, and every moment we choose to care for someone else. And so, this chapter of Ethan's story comes to a close, but the ripples of his actions continue. The world is full of stories waiting to be written, lives waiting to be touched, and kindness waiting to be shared. Thank you for being part of this one. Now, let's go out and create our own. Thank you for being part of Ethan's incredible journey. Stories like these remind us that kindness is contagious, and the smallest actions can create the biggest waves. If this story touched your heart, there's so much more waiting for you. Subscribe to Elderly Wisdom now to hear more inspiring tales that will warm your soul, spark your imagination, and remind you of the power of humanity. Let's continue spreading hope, one story at a time.